My name is Natalie. I'm 34 years old, and I run Voss Meridian Consulting, a logistics and supply chain advisory firm based in Charlotte, North Carolina, that closed last year at $2.3 million in revenue. I was disowned by my own family at a Thanksgiving table in 2021, the same year my company signed its first seven-figure contract. Somewhere in a storage unit in Millbrook, Ohio, there's a manila accordion folder with over 100 hospice sign-in sheets in it. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why that folder mattered more than anything my aunt said about me in front of 40 people at my grandmother's memorial service. I can still hear her voice cutting through the reception hall. She didn't come back for 2 years, and now she wants to stand up here and cry about it. What she didn't know was that the woman walking through the door behind her, in blue scrubs, was holding proof that would end the conversation in about 4 minutes. If you're watching this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now for you, and let's get into it. Let me take you back to where this actually started. I grew up in Millbrook, Ohio, a town of about 6,200 people 40 minutes outside Columbus, in a 2-story house on Chestnut Ridge Road that my grandmother Eleanor Voss bought in 1987. The house always smelled like coffee and the lavender hand soap she kept by the kitchen sink, and there was a yellow formica table in the breakfast nook where every important conversation in that family happened, for better or worse. My mother died of ovarian cancer when I was 19, in March of 2011, and Grandma Eleanor raised me the rest of the way through college, sewing my name into dorm room bedsheets and driving 2.5 hours to Athens, Ohio, just to bring me a casserole dish on a random Tuesday. My Aunt Deborah, my mother's younger sister, lived 12 minutes away with her daughter, my cousin Whitney, who was 2 years younger than me, and who Grandma Eleanor called the easy one. Whitney got the birthday parties with the rented bounce house and the sheet cake from the bakery on Main Street. I got a card with a $20 bill folded inside it, if I got anything at all. It wasn't cruelty, exactly. It was just clear, from the time I was about 11, whose achievements got announced at Sunday dinner and who's got a polite nod and a change of subject. When I made valedictorian in 2010, Deborah spent most of that dinner talking about Whitney's dance recital instead. I noticed. I just never said anything. By 2019, I'd finished my MBA at Ohio State and taken a supply chain analyst job in Charlotte, making $71,000 a year. Deborah ran an event planning boutique called Kramer & Co., celebrations out of a rented studio on 5th Street, and by the fall of 2021 it was $180,000 in debt to 2 different lenders. On October 9, 2021, she called me at 8:40 in the evening and asked me to co-sign a loan to refinance the business. I said no. Not let me think about it. A flat, calm no, because I'd watched her miss 2 mortgage payments on her own house that same year, and I wasn't willing to put my credit behind a business I'd never seen a set of books for. She went quiet for 11 seconds. Then she said, "You've always thought you were better than this family," and hung up. 6 weeks later, at Thanksgiving, in front of my grandmother, my cousin Whitney, and 11 other relatives, Deborah stood up before dessert and said the words I'll never fully unhear. "She's not blood to this family anymore. She's just renting a seat at this table, and I think it's time we stopped setting a place for her." The room went completely silent except for the sound of the oven timer still buzzing in the kitchen, because nobody had bothered to turn it off. I could smell the pumpkin pie burning slightly at the edges. My grandmother, 83 years old at the time, and already showing the early signs of the vascular dementia that would put her in hospice 2 years later, didn't defend me. She just looked down at her plate, at the cranberry sauce she hadn't touched, and said nothing at all. I didn't cry, and I want to be clear about that because I know how these stories usually go. My hands were completely steady when I folded my cloth napkin into a neat square, set it beside my untouched slice of pie, stood up and said, "Okay, thank you for dinner." Nobody stopped me. I got in my car, a used 2017 Honda Civic with 91,000 miles on it, and drove 4 hours back to Charlotte that night with the radio off the entire way. I didn't speak to Deborah again for 2 years, and for the first several months I didn't speak to almost anyone. What got me through that winter was a woman named Priya Anand, my manager at the consulting firm, who noticed I was working late every night that December, staying at my desk until nearly 9 p.m. most nights, and eventually just asked if I wanted to come to her family's Diwali dinner, instead of being alone in a one-bedroom apartment off South Boulevard. Priya became something like the aunt I never had. She was the one who reviewed my first independent client pitch line by line at her kitchen table, who co-signed my apartment lease in January 2022 when my credit was still thin, who sat with me on the phone for 2 hours the night Grandma Eleanor was moved into Brightview Hospice Center in April 2022, and I didn't know who else to call. Year 1 after the Thanksgiving blow-up, I drove back to Millbrook every Sunday I could manage, usually arriving at Brightview by 2 p.m., and I started keeping a folder, every sign-in sheet, every visitor log page with my name and the time stamped in blue ink by the front desk nurse, a woman named Yvonne Castillo who'd worked at Brightview for 11 years. I kept it partly out of habit from consulting work, where you document everything, and partly, if I'm honest, because some part of me already knew Deborah would try to rewrite what happened. Year 2 looked almost identical. 104 visits total over about 22 months, according to Brightview's own records, missing only the weekends I was traveling for client work in Atlanta and Denver. Meanwhile, Voss Meridian Consulting, which I'd founded in March 2022 with $14,000 of my own savings, grew from $140,000 in first-year revenue to $2.3 million by the end of 2023, after we landed a distribution contract with a regional grocery chain worth $890,000 annually. The only contact from Deborah in those 2 years was a single text message on my birthday in 2022 that said, "Hope you're well," with nothing else. No call, no visit, no mention of Grandma. Then, in February 2024, a business journal in Charlotte ran a profile on me titled "The 33-Year-Old Rebuilding Regional Freight," complete with a photo of me standing in our new 4,200-square-foot warehouse space off Interstate 485. Somehow it made its way back to Millbrook within days. 3 days after it ran, Whitney texted me for the first time in over 2 years. "Just saw the article. So proud of you." And within a week, Deborah had liked 4 of my old Instagram posts from 2019. Ones she'd never so much as acknowledged when I originally posted them. In March, Whitney accidentally sent me a screenshot meant for a family group chat called Voss Fam instead of our private thread. A message from Deborah, time-stamped 11:47 p.m., that read, "If Grandma's estate is worth what I think it is, and Natalie's the one with the money now, we need her back in the will conversation before anything happens to the house on Chestnut Ridge." Whitney followed it up 30 seconds later with "Om Jong chat, please ignore," but I'd already read it twice. I sat with that message for a long time, sitting on my apartment balcony with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. Then I called an estate attorney in Columbus named Marcus Feld, just to understand where I actually stood, whether I had any legal claim, any legal obligation, anything at all, or whether this was purely emotional at this point. He told me, during a 45-minute call on April 2nd, that Grandma Eleanor had never removed me from her will, that as far as the paperwork showed, Deborah had no power of attorney and no authority over the estate whatsoever, and that if there was ever a dispute about who had actually shown up for Eleanor in her final years, documented visit records would matter more than any of us expected. Grandma Eleanor died on June 2nd, 2025, at 4:17 in the morning, with Yvonne Castillo beside her. The memorial was held on June 14th at the Millbrook Community Church Reception Hall. I almost didn't go. I went because I decided Deborah didn't get to write the ending of that relationship for me. The reception hall smelled like carnations and burnt coffee from the industrial urn on the folding table by the wall, and there were about 40 people seated in metal chairs when I walked in at 2:15 p.m., 10 minutes late because I'd sat in my car in the parking lot for a while first. Deborah was already speaking, standing near the podium in a black dress with her reading glasses pushed up into her hair. Not really a eulogy, more of a performance, aimed just enough in my direction that everyone in the room understood exactly who it was for. "She didn't come back for 2 years," Deborah said, her voice cracking in the specific. practiced way that used to work on me when I was younger. And now she wants to stand here and act like she cared, after everything. A few heads turned toward me. I felt my face go hot. But I didn't raise my voice. I said, "That's not true, Deb, and you know it's not true." That's when the side door creaked open and Yvonne Castillo walked in, still in her navy blue scrubs from her shift at Brightview, a stethoscope still looped around her neck, holding a manila folder almost identical to the one sitting in my own storage unit, except hers had come straight off Brightview's visitor management printer that morning. She hadn't planned any of this. She'd come on her lunch break just to pay her respects, heard Deborah's version of events from the doorway, and something in her simply decided the record needed to speak for itself before another word was said. She walked the folder straight up to the podium, set it down in front of Deborah, and said, quietly but clearly enough for the whole room to hear, "Natalie signed in 104 times over 22 months. I pulled the printout myself this morning. It's right here, if anyone wants to see it." For about 3 full seconds, nobody in that room said a word, and the only sound was the coffee urn hissing in the back. I watched something genuine cross Deborah's face in that moment. Not anger yet. Something closer to real fear. Like she understood exactly how this would land, and there was nothing left she could do to stop it. Her hand actually trembled a little as she touched the edge of the folder. "I didn't know," she said, quieter than I'd ever heard her sound in my entire life. I assumed, because you stopped calling me, because you stopped coming around to my house." And then, almost as quickly as it appeared, the fear hardened back into something defensive, something more familiar. "That doesn't change what you said to me on the phone back in 2021. I looked at her and said the only thing I actually needed to say, "No, but it changes who actually showed up for the woman who raised us both, and who didn't." I didn't need to argue any further than that. The folder did the rest of the work for me. Relatives who'd gone quiet during Deborah's speech started reading the printout themselves, passing the pages hand to hand across the metal chairs, and nobody in that room was looking at Deborah with sympathy anymore. Not because I'd attacked her, but because her own 2-year version of events had just collapsed under a stack of paper she never knew existed until 60 seconds earlier. She sat down at her own table for the rest of the reception and barely spoke to anyone. Nobody forced that on her. It was simply the natural weight of a story that wasn't true finally meeting a room full of people who had the real one in their hands. Whitney found me outside afterward, standing by my car in the church parking lot with her arms crossed against the June heat. And she didn't try to defend her mother at all. She just said, "I should have asked you what actually happened instead of just believing her for 2 years. I'm sorry, Nat." It was the first time she'd used that nickname since we were kids. I told her the door wasn't closed on my end, just not automatically open either, and that felt like the honest place to leave it. We hugged for a moment briefly, and she said she'd call me sometime, and I believed her. Here's what I actually believe, after all of this. The people who truly love you don't need a printout to know you showed up. But the people who are willing to lie about you to a room full of family, so they don't have to admit they were wrong. Those people were never going to give you credit, no matter what you did, no matter how much money you made, or how many Sundays you drove 4 hours round trip. Documentation isn't for the people who already believe you. It's for the moment you finally realize you can't keep quiet anymore and let someone else's lie become the official version of your own life. If this story hit close to home, tell me in the comments. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and I'll see you in the next video.